Okay, so we are live on another edition of the Edlow podcast. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. This is another bucket list moment for me. I am with one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, WWE Hall of Famer, Tito Santana. Mr. Santana, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I was telling you off air, I went to a lot of house shows when I was a kid, all the way through the 80s and 90s, and you were on if not every, almost every one of the house shows that I went to. Very rarely, I'm from Sacramento, California, so very rarely did we have um, pay-per-views here. We had the Royal Rumble in, I think it was 1990, the one that Yokozuna won. That was the only pay-per-view that came through, but we had lots of house shows back in that time, and you were always there. And my favorite run of yours is the Strike Force run, from beginning to end. Like when you and Rick Martel got together, won the belts, losing his Demolition, and then leading to the turn after the Brainbusters situation in WrestleMania, and then the feud you guys had really just was so well thought out and well done, for both your parts. So excited to have you here, man. This is great.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to. I used to love to come all over California because that's my kind of people there.
Yeah, yeah, I know. There's a lot of Latin American people here. There's still, even now in the independent scene, Lucha Libre does incredibly well here. There's a few Lucha Libre promotions that come through. When I own a wrestling ring, and I did some ring rentals for a group called Lucha Libre USA that had Blue Demon Jr. on it, and Chavo Guerrero Jr. and a bunch of guys like that, and it drew incredibly well. So I'm sure you had quite a following out here.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So tell me where, I want to start just getting some background about you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Mission, Texas. Mission is in South Texas, 5 miles from the Mexican border, 5 miles from McAllen, Texas. That's where a lot of the people are crossing the border right now.
Uh huh.
And where I went to school, probably 75 to 80% were Hispanics,
Mm.
Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
And, my first language, of course, was Spanish.
Mm. Okay. So did you, growing up, were you a wrestling fan when you were a kid?
No, I was not. Wrestling came from San Antonio, Joe Blanchard,
Okay.
and it used to come on either at 11 o'clock or at midnight. And uh, I was never able to stay up that late to watch it. So, I never watched it. So I wasn't a wrestling fan at
Mm.
all.
Mm. So, my understanding is you were athletic. You played sports growing up, and even played college and a little bit of professional football.
Yes, I did. It was my eighth grade coach who started trying to convince me to start playing football. We were migrant workers,
Mm.
and uh, we wouldn't start school till uh, probably the middle of October.
Mm.
Uh, so I came into my eighth grade and started in the middle of October, and the season was almost over. And the coach wanted me to go out for football that season,
Mm.
and I couldn't understand why he was asking me. And I was kind of afraid to. I thought the football players were were monsters. Even in the middle school. So I just told him that you know I didn't think my mom would go for it, and I just told him that I thought. I mean, I didn't know nothing about it. I thought I had to buy my own equipment and uh, shoes and helmets and shoulder pads, and so I just told him that my mom wouldn't let me. He says, "Well, tell your mom that I'll drop you off at home." And
Mm.
I said, "Okay, I'll talk to her." But I didn't talk to her, but I came back, the following day, and I told him that my mom just wouldn't let me go out for football.
So did you eventually though did go out?
Well, what happened is, being a migrant worker, they would keep us after school for 1 hour every day, and we'd go in the library, and you know, it was almost like a punishment for being migrants because we missed all that school at the beginning of the year. So I had to be there for an hour, and I was there with another guy, and the other guy told me, he says, "Why don't we go try out?" The football season was over. He says, "Why don't we go try out for basketball? If we make it, we can get out of a study hall."
Mm.
So, I asked. They had a pretty good team, and the coach. Uh, I, we I tried out. Both of us went and tried out, and unfortunately, my buddy didn't make it. I made the team,
Oh,
and
nice.
I ended up starting, and we ended up going 33-0 in our team with the eighth graders that year. And the following year, my brother was 2 years older than myself, and he was going to be a junior. My brother was about 265 pounds as a junior, and
Wow.
he started preparing to play football. It was going to be his first year too, his junior year, and him and I came from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, uh, and we started. That was the first time that I started school, at the beginning of the year. So he was going to go work out the first day. We got there just in time, and I went with him, and Lord and behold, the eighth grade coach, his name was Coach Sanchez, was there, and he introduced me to our freshman coach, and he says, "I know this guy can be a good player if you can talk him into it." And I was just itching for somebody to ask me to go out. So the coach asked me if I wanted to play football, and I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'll get you suited up." And that's what I did. I showed up the following morning and started working out. And before you know it, I went from fourth string tight end to third to second. And then I was starting before the season started.
Wow. Wow. So so now tell me, I mean, did you did you develop a passion for football? Was that kind of the plan while you were going through high school?
Yeah, I mean, I my sophomore year, we were ranked second in in the state, and I was the only sophomore that made the varsity, as a matter of fact.
Hmm.
So, I started seeing success, at a pretty quick.
Hmm.
So for me to be, uh, you know, with the varsity, as a sophomore, that was quite an accomplishment. They moved me. I was a second string tight end, as a matter of fact, in the varsity. So I didn't get a lot of playing time, and I played a strong safety on defense, and didn't get a lot of playing time on either side. But I did get a few snaps. But the experience that I got from being with that great team really, I think, helped me a lot.
Yeah, well that's great. You end up going and doing some college football as well, is that right?
Yes, I took my ACT scores, and because all those years, believe it or not, we'd miss school at the beginning of the year, and then my dad would take us out before the year was out, so we were missing at the beginning and at the end. So I don't think that I was dumb. I think that I just was not fully educated. So
Hmm.
I took my ACT exam my senior year, and I just barely squeaked in to get into West Texas State with my scores. So there was no way that I was going to get into Texas A&M or Texas or any of the bigger schools in Texas.
Hmm.
But I was happy with West Texas State.
Yeah. Did you end up getting a degree from West Texas, or did that come later?
No, I ended up getting a degree. I mean, I loved school. I really I went to college, and I wouldn't miss any. I would go to school every day. I ended up getting my degree in 4 years. As a matter of fact, I even got because coaches back then would teach driver's ed, so I got certified to teach driver's ed,
Oh,
and I got a
nice.
double certification, physical education and Spanish.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Wow. So you, my understanding, I was reading up on you a little bit before this podcast, and I heard that I read somewhere that you had tried out, I believe it was for the Chiefs, but you'd hurt your Achilles beforehand, and it affected your combine. Is that right?
Yeah, I used to run a 4.8
Mm-hmm.
40, and once in a while I dip into the 4.7, high 4.7s, and uh, 2 weeks before. I mean, I was training so hard for a rookie camp, and 2 weeks before I was working out with a quarterback, and I was running a flag pattern, and I stepped into a hole and tore my Achilles tendon, and
Mm.
I was got a cortisone shot right away. The trainer was there, luckily, and he sent me to the doctor, and I got a cortisone shot, right away, and I was on crutches for a week. Uh, the second week, went and got another cortisone shot, and I was able to walk without crutches. And then the third weekend, I got the third cortisone shot, and I hadn't done any running on my foot. And we got there on a Sunday, and we got there on a Saturday and Sunday morning. They timed us on the 40, and I believe I ran like a 5.2 40. And when I got cut, I should have told the coach, because I didn't tell anybody that I was hurt, because I knew
Mm.
if I would have told them, they would have sent me home.
Mm.
So I should have told them to retime me, but I mean, I was starting. I started every preseason game.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
They drafted a number one their number one pick was a tight end from
Mm.
Kentucky, and the guy never saw a down on preseason. I started in front of him, and then they traded him to the New York Giants, and then he got cut.
Hmm.
But I was a great blocker, because we used to play the wishbone at West Texas State, so I could block,
Mm.
and I had some pretty good hands also. My only problem was the time that I turned in when I ran the 40. I couldn't push off my leg. I told the trainer, I said, can you please really rep up my knee? I mean, my ankle, because I something's wrong. Just rep it up tight. And so I had no bent in it, and but I was able to run.
Yeah.
And a few, it took me probably a couple, because I was there for 6 weeks. A couple of weeks later, I felt that I was 100%, and I should have asked them to retime my 40, but I didn't.
Mm. Wow. So that leads to you going and doing some training. And my understanding was that during college, your quarterback was Tully Blanchard. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. We Tully Blanchard was our quarterback. The $1 million man Ted DiBiase was on the same team.
Oh, wow.
So it was he was a offensive tackle, and my junior year, Tully Blanchard started talking to me about, he said, my dad thinks that you could have a great career in professional wrestling. And I said, I don't know anything about wrestling. I said, I love football, and I'm doing good in football, because my junior year, I started getting letters from the NFL. Like, I got
Mm-hmm.
about 4 or 5 teams that sent me letters, including the Cowboys. And Tom Landry was the coach for the Cowboys at the time. Tom Landry was from Mission, Texas.
Mm.
So, I was gung ho football player.
Yeah. Wow. What was it ultimately that made you switch over? Was it just the lack of success at the professional level, or was there something else?
No, I went and I played. After I got cut from Kansas City, I had a coach in college that had a connection with the BC Lions, and they brought me in to the BC Lions, and there was a defensive end that had got caught from the Minnesota Vikings,
Mm.
and the tryout that I had, uh, the head coach took me and the other guy, and he says, "Okay, line up." So we lined up. I had helmet and shoulder pads because it was already in the middle of the season for them. And he says, "Okay, let's. You're gonna block him." So I hit the guy twice, and I set him on his butt both times. The guy was like 245, 250 pounds defensive end, and I could block, and I knocked him to the ground both times, and he told the guy, "Okay, you can go back to the hotel," and he told me, "You made the team." Uh,
Nice.
so I was just in the practice squad because I didn't know any of the plays, so I didn't get to play much at all because they were towards the end of this was probably the middle of September, and their season was over at the end of October. So but I did sign a 3-year contract with them. I came back and I started. I was the only tight end in the following year. I started with the BC Lions, and after the season, I had told DiBiase, I said, I want to start training. My intention was just to train uh,
Mhm.
and go back to football, but I just started enjoying wrestling so much. Things started moving pretty fast with me, and I just gave up football.
Nice. Where did you end up training?
I ended up training in Tampa, Florida. I don't know if you ever heard of Hiro Matsuda.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, a
I've
lot of
heard a
the
lot of
guys.
stories.
Yeah, a lot of the guys went through his training, including Hulk Hogan. Hulk was there probably about a month after I got there.
Mm,
Hulk started training. I was already gone,
mm.
uh, so yeah, that's where I got my training and I got my break.
Did you have so Hogan tells a story about the first time he goes in there and he gets his leg broken by Hiro Matsuda. Do you have any stories of being stretched or anything like that during training?
No, I think Hiro Matsuda respected me because I was an athlete.
Hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
he and I was all ears. I went in there into the match, and he tried to teach me, and you know, I was all ears. He never really got cute with me, and Barry O, Bob Orton's brother, was also breaking in,
Hmm.
and he was working out with not Bob Senior, Bob Senior. Bob's father was working out with Barry, and you know, for some reason, Hiro Matsuda didn't care for him too much because he was already doing high spots, and he hadn't
Hmm.
even had a match yet. So
Hmm.
that kind of turned off Hiro Matsuda. He says, you know, this guy's cute. Whatever you do, uh, don't do that. All you have to do is, just listen to me. And he says, he taught me how to hit the ropes and hit the ropes. My whole side was purple. And he says,
Hmm.
all you need to know is, there's 7 takedowns. Learn the 7 takedowns, and you can have a match with anybody. So I don't know if you know that, like the headlock, take him over, arm
Oh yeah.
drag, take him over, go behind him, schoolboy him, fireman carry, single leg dive, double leg dive, and there's another one that I can't remember right off the bat, but there were 7 of them.
Yeah.
And I learned those. It says you learn those, you can have a match with anybody. Everything else will come into play. You tell me that you're one of the boys. You know how it's not easy. It's not an easy profession to learn. I mean,
It's not. I trained. It's actually interesting that my story in wrestling. I when I was 16, 17, there was a local wrestling school. It was open for 2 or 3 months, and it wasn't long enough for me to get fully trained. But because I was so big, I mean, I'm 6'7". They would just guys would book me, and I was 17. I had 18. I had no idea what I was doing, so I would do that. So I went back and trained again with Johnny Jeter, who had a run in the WWE with the Spirit Squad, and same thing. I mean, it was a situation where he would say, "You don't need to do all that, right? It's just you learn. We just did chain wrestling and bumps and lots of blow up drills and just uh, and that's what he said, right? Is he goes, as long as you can. It was so interesting to me how you learn how to bump, you learn all the basics, and everything, even those high spots, are all kind of a variation of those things you learn. So if you learn those things and someone says you know how to do this, you can figure it out. It's actually pretty interesting. So
Yeah, well, back then, I don't know. You probably didn't have the luxury that I had. I started working full time, and everybody that I worked with was better than me,
yeah,
and everybody was teaching me. And I was I had I had a real humble attitude, man. I wanted to learn, and I used to go and kiss their butts, and please watch my match, please help me out, and you know. But even with all that, getting in the ring, you're so nervous, and you don't have a clue, and when do you fight back? When do you how much selling do you do? Facial expressions to let the people see you selling. And I mean, there's just so much to learn. When at what point do you do this, and at what point do you do that? And I would watch every match, and the more you watch and the more you get in there, sometimes I felt like I was making some progress, and then I go in the next night, and I would say to myself, I haven't learned a damn thing. I
right.
like going backwards.
Yeah,
It was it wasn't easy. I mean, it was
yeah.
very hard, but luckily I stuck with it.
Yeah, that is something that's different these days. Is that because the WWE pretty much put all the territories out of business. I mean, there's a lot of indies out there. You can get work every weekend, but you're not guaranteed you're going to get a guy who every time that's better than you. Can you think of anybody in particular who you felt really put their stamp on the beginning of your career?
Well, Mr. Fuji,
Mm,
the heels were my best friends,
mm,
because those are the guys that I was going to be working with. So, Mr. Fuji, I had been in the business for 2.5 years when I got to New York, and I mean, I was able to. I came from Texas, and I ended up in New York City pretty quick with the help of Andre the Giant.
mm,
And Mr. Fuji says you got to learn timing. You can throw 20 drop kicks, which don't mean diddly, but if you throw one in the right time, you're going to get a real pop.
mm,
So I was working with him in Wildwood, New Jersey, and I, I was going to beat him, and we were supposed to go close to 20 minutes. We had a 20-minute time limit, and Mr. Fuji was tough. I mean, he martial arts, and I mean, he could eat me up and spit me out. And he says, "Just listen to me, kid." And I'm in the match, and he's just not giving me much at all. And I'm saying to myself, because I used to hear the old timers would take advantage of the young guys, and they would say your comeback is to the dressing room. That's when you get your comeback. You come back to the locker room. So I'm selling for him, and I'm selling for him, and he had talked to me about timing. He says it's just when you got to hear the people, listen to the people. So he's got me on the mat, and he says, okay, sit up on your back, bring your arm up, start shaking it. And then he says, start shaking it faster, come up to your feet. He says, can you hear the people now? And the people started to go. That's the first time I ever heard the people, responding to where I had the control of the fans, and I could. The first time I was able to hear it, the fans, and then he called the comeback for me. I made the comeback, and I beat him. With about 30 seconds into the left at the end of the 20 minute, and came back into the locker room, and I thanked him, and I said, man, he asked me, did you hear the people? And I said, yeah, it's the first time I ever heard them.
yeah, man, that's awesome. So tell me where you go next after you get out of training, you break out. Did you have any notable, I guess, did you have any noticeable feuds or anything at the beginning? Something that you kind of felt put you on the map?
Well, when I left, uh, I only had 4 matches in Florida,
Hmm.
and you know, and the pay for beginners, as you know, is not very good. So I
Right.
was paying for an apartment. I was sharing an apartment, and I had to split an apartment with Tully Blanchard.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't making enough money to pay it. I had saved my money from playing for the BC Lions, and but I wasn't all that much. I didn't want to go through the whole thing. But Terry Funk was a world champion, and Terry Funk came into to Tampa, and he was gonna he wrestled that night, and he was the main event. He was a world champion wrestling Dusty Rhodes, and he called me into the Heels locker room, which back then they used to really kayfabe. So he says, "How do you like it, my boy?" And I said, "Well, I like it." I said, "But I, I I really can't afford to keep going." I hadn't even had a match yet when he showed up, and
Hmm.
he says, "I said, well, I think what I'm going to do, Terry," I said, I'm gonna just uh, go home and start training for football again, and I'll give it another shot next season after the season's over." And he says, "Well, let me talk to Eddie Graham." And he was a world champion, and they own the territory. They owned Amarillo, and before you know it, this was 2 days later. Eddie Graham calls me into his office, and he started booking me. And a couple of weeks later, they said Tom Ernesto was the booker, and he says, "You're going to get a big break." He says, "How would you like to be making $1,500 a week?" And I said, "I'd love to be making $1,500 a week because that's what I was making when I was playing football." And he said, "You're going to get a big break in Atlanta." Well, I had only had 4 matches, and I had seen what the interviews of the main event guys, and I know that I couldn't talk like the main eventers. So
Hmm.
I went to Atlanta, and that's not what happened. I started in the bottom, and I continued to work out in the ring with Donker Noodle, and they worked on me. As a matter of fact, my first match in Augusta, Georgia, it was sold out, and they worked on me. They said, "You're a young guy. You got to come into the ring with a lot of energy, hit the apron, jump over the top rope." So that's what I did. I hit the apron, jump over the top rope. The place was sold out. I tripped over the top rope, fell on my butt, and got up, and I was going to wrestle Ted Oates, and I went up to the middle of the ring, and the referee, they wanted to crack up, but I said, "Well, just call me Gracious," and they both started laughing. But that was embarrassing, and I was there for a while. Then I got booked in Charlotte, and I learned so much. I was there for 8 months. Then I got booked in Charlotte, and again, I was working in the middle of the I moved up to the middle of the card, and I was working with better wrestlers there, and luckily they were all teaching me and helping me out. And uh, I didn't get no main event matches or anything like that. But from there, Blackjack Mulligan and Murdoch were there, and they asked, they bought the territory from the Funks in Amarillo, and they wanted me to come to Amarillo. They said, "We're gonna make you an international star, Mexican
Hmm.
star."
Hmm.
Well, Murdoch was a baby face. I was a baby face, a Mexican baby face, and I got there. I had been in the business maybe 2 years, and I had learned quite a bit. So I know that whenever I was in a territory and they brought a guy in and they were going to push him, they would give him some wins on TV.
Hmm.
He'd get his arm raised pretty quick. So my first TV match in Amarillo, Texas, there was a guy by the name of Stan Lane
Oh
that
yeah, Sweet
and
Stan
he
Lane. Yeah.
Yeah, both of us went to Amarillo, and we went against each other, and we went a draw.
Uh huh.
And when the match was over, I was pretty disappointed, and I said, they told me they were going to give me the biggest push that I ever had, make me a star. I said, I know that when somebody's going to get a push, you're not going to go 10-minute draw on television.
Right.
So Mulligan wasn't there. Murdoch was the one. They were partners. Mulligan was in the main event somewhere, probably in Charlotte or another part of the country. So when he came back, I said, Mulligan, I said, I'm not getting treated right here. He says, well, we are going to push you. And when he was there, he started pushing me. But when he was gone, Murdoch would make me go backwards.
Mm.
Luckily, Andre the Giant showed up, and when Andre would show up, he'd do battle royals, and the territory would always draw with him, in battle royals.
Mm-hmm.
And and I had become friends, and I told Andre, I said, Andre, they're treating me like crap here,
Mm.
uh, you know, and unbeknown to me, Mario Savoldi was a referee, and he was also part of the production in Amarillo. He stole a tape with one of my matches, and Andre the Giant was on his way to New York, and Andre brought a tape and showed it to Vince McMahon Sr. And before you know it, I was on my way to New York. So I got to New York with the help of Andre the Giant, pretty quick.
Wow.
And then, you asked me about what was my first biggest break. My first biggest break, all of a sudden, I'm teamed up with Ivan Putski, and we become the World Tag Team Champions in New York. So he elevated me from a opener or middle card guy to a main event guy to a tag team champion, and I was all of a sudden a name. Even in Japan, I went to Japan and they used me pretty good in Japan.
Yeah. So, what was it? How did you strike up that friendship with Andre the Giant?
Well, when I went to Atlanta, I told you I went to Atlanta from Florida.
Yeah.
Uh, I was working out and just training and being an opener match. And Ole Anderson tells me Andre the Giant is coming in. Go pick him up at the airport. I had a Granada, and I went up and I picked up Andre the Giant. I had a bucket seat. I don't know if you remember the Ford Granadas. It was a 1975 Ford Granada, and I
Uh-huh.
and I picked him and David Von Erich. David Von Erich was also 6'7".
Mm-hmm.
So Andre was in the front seat, and Andre got in my seat and kind of stretched it a little bit, and he broke the bucket seat in my car. So I ended up uh, trading the car in and I bought me an Oldsmobile, and I started, whenever Andre was around from there on, Andre knew that he was going to travel with me.
Nice.
I told him, travel with me. You got to ride, and he traveled with me, from there on, and he liked for me to play cribbage with him, and we played gin rummy, and he kept me occupied, and I went out drinking with him a few times, but there's no way that I could keep up with him.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've heard he was quite the drinker, man.
Yep.
So you get to New York and Vince Senior. So were you in New York when? Were you there during the transition from Vince Senior to Vince Junior?
Well, I was in New York for a year. They put the belts on me. We dropped them. I left. Went to Minnesota.
Okay.
That's when I did my first angle with the Sheik, not the Iron
Hmm.
Sheik. It was another Sheik,
Yeah.
and I was there for 2 years. And then I went back to Atlanta. Jim Barnett really wanted me in Atlanta, but Ole Anderson didn't.
Hmm.
So Jim Barnett told me they were going to make me again another international star because they had TV that went all over the world, the Ted Turner station. And I went back to Atlanta, and they gave me a guarantee. And I mean, they gave me that guarantee, and Ole Anderson took the guarantee away from me. And before you know it, Oli tells me, I kept I, I kept saying to Oli, by then I knew if they were going to push me, and he wasn't even putting me on TV. And I said, Oli, when am I going to get this big break? He says, well, I
Mm,
don't have, I haven't figured out what I'm going to do yet. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do yet.
mm,
So, you know, finally, Oli comes and tells me Bill Watts wants you really bad.
mm,
So before you know it, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff tells me Louisiana, Tito, you're going to be on the road all the time. And I had just gotten married and we had a baby, and I didn't want to
mm,
be in the road all the time. But
mm,
Oli was treating me like shit, and I needed to make some money.
mm,
So finally, I told I took. They tried. I'd go in there, and believe it or not, uh, they would book me in all the only the good towns, and they were making me good money because they were working an angle with me
mm,
because I told Paul how much I made the first tour that I had with them. I think I
mm,
made like $2,500, and I was the second match. And Paul
mm,
says, Tito, they're working you. He says they're going to bring you in, and then the payoffs are the shits there. So
mm,
Bill Watts talked to me, and he said, don't listen to Paul. I said, Paul, Bill. I said, the only thing, Bill Watts, the only
mm,
thing that Paul tells me is that the trips are big and the payoffs are the shits here.
mm,
Uh, and he says, no. He says, you need polishing. I'm going to make you a superstar. Uh, so I the third or fourth time that Oli sends me to Louisiana from Atlanta, uh, I go up to Bill Watts and I say, Bill, I want to talk to you about coming in. I think I've made my decision. And Bill Watts, they had a TV tape, and he says, this was on a Tuesday. He says, I'll talk to you on Friday in Houston. So I said to myself, well, he wanted me so bad. Now he doesn't even want to talk to me.
mm.
How do you talk to the promoters? Right? In wrestling, it's not like when you're playing football that your credentials speak for themselves.
Sure.
They can work you. And so I called Vince McMahon Sr. right away, and I said, Vince, I'm going to talk to Bill Watts on Friday about coming into Louisiana, and Vince Sr. says, uh, that's okay. He says he's a good man. He's a good boy. He'll treat you good. Well, Friday I get to Houston, and Ernie Ladd says, "Son, you got to make the biggest decision of your life tonight." I had no idea what he was talking about. He says, "Vince McMahon Sr. wants you bad in New York, and Bill Watts wants you bad, and Bill wants to talk to you as soon as he gets here."
Hmm.
So now all of a sudden I became important again. So Bill Watts takes me in the locker room, and he says, Vince wants you. I want you. You're a good worker, but you need polishing. By the time I get done with you, you will be a main eventer anywhere you want. But my wife was from New Jersey, so and I had already been in New York. You know, I told Bill, I said, Bill, I'm going to New York. He said, no, no, don't make the decision yet.
Hmm.
So sure enough, he said, Vince wants you to call him in the morning. So I called Vince in the morning, and I said, I said, Vince, this is Tito. And there was like a pause on the line, like for maybe 30 seconds, but it seemed to me like an hour.
Hmm.
So I said, I thought I started thinking to myself, well, don't tell me that Vince is on this work and he's going to be part of the work. Now he's going to start working me also. So I
Hmm.
started to get pissed off on the other on my line on the other side. And finally Vince wouldn't say nothing. And I said to Vince, I said, Vince, I said, the only reason I called you is because I was told to call you.
Hmm.
And then he says, yep, uh, it's time for you to come home. He said, your starting date is May 10th. And the reason I don't forget that is because May 10th was my birthday.
Nice.
So I said, he didn't make me any promises. I said, that's all I needed to hear.
Hmm.
And I started doing TV. I'd go back. I quit working for Olia, but I'll go back to Louisiana, and Ernie Ladd would give me the book. He says, Bill Watts wants you to pick what towns you want to work in. They would. I started getting treated like a superstar. I would fly in. They'd give me a rental car. I'd only work in the big towns. Just they'd give me. I had a great time there. For a while. So I wasn't driving. I was flying everywhere.
Nice.
And before you know it, I'm in New York, and I started in New York, and that was my biggest break.
Yeah.
But this promoters, man, all the promoters, they would work you and they lie to you. I mean, they lie to you right to your face. I wasn't used to that being a football player.
Sure.
Your credentials spoke for themselves as an athlete, not
How
in
would
wrestling.
how would you navigate that? I mean, was that just a situation of you live and you learn, or did anyone smarten you up to that?
No, 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 nobody smartened you up because we were all individual contractors. We were all fighting for spots.
Sure.
So nobody, it was hard for somebody to really, really take you under their arm and tell you everything they learned because you'd be competing against them. Like, my 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 friends were the heels because I wasn't competing against the heels.
Sure.
My competition was the baby faces. If I was gonna make some moves, to the top of the ladder, I was gonna remove a baby face, and
Sure.
it wasn't as much fun as they make it sound out to be. But the promoters had all they decided who they were going to push. Vince McMahon decides who's going to make a star and who he's not.
Right. So you get back, and how long was it before? Because I believe at some point you became the Intercontinental Champion. Right?
It wasn't long after that.
Mhm.
Jimmy Snuka was there, and Jimmy Snuka uh, dropped the belt to Don Morocco, and before you know it, they tell me you're going to take the belt away from Morocco, and that's how they told me, and God, to get the IC belt, was unbelievable for me.
Yeah, I bet. So you have a run as Intercontinental Champion, and first, Don Morocco is a staple in wrestling. I mean, huge. My dad used to tell me stories about seeing him even before, the back in the territory days, seeing him come out to wrestle in big time wrestling out here in California at the Memorial Auditorium. But then I believe you ended up having a good run with. Would you have a good run with Greg Valentine over that?
Yeah,
With
we had the longest feud in the history of the WWF. Uh, we wrestled. I was an IC champion, and we wrestled for 3 years against each other. Uh, I had surgery on my knee. It was Mr. Wonderful who tore up my Achilles, my cartilage.
Mm,
But I wanted to do an angle with Mr. Wonderful, but they didn't trust Mr. Wonderful. Mr. Wonderful used to lose his temper and tell everybody to go screw themselves, and you know he they didn't want. George Scott said, "No, you're gonna do the angle with Greg the Hammer Valentine."
mm. Another amazing worker. I mean, even I saw him. So I want to say it was 1998. So long past when he was really working with the WWF, WWE, and it was a show where he and Honky Tonk Man worked Coco Beware and Jake the Snake, and even then, even though he was a little bit older, a little bit past his prime, he and Honky Tonk Man could just work the crowd, and I mean didn't even have to do anything. So
Right.
just a great worker. And tell me that kind of, does that play into, I know you are you I mean I think it's a huge claim for you to say that you were the opening match of WrestleMania, but if I'm not mistaken, when you heard you were the opening match, you didn't feel great about that.
Well, at the time, me and Valentine had the hottest feud in the WWF. We were selling out big arenas without Hulk Hogan on the card, and it hadn't happened before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Hulk Hogan was the one that would be the sellout, but we were in L.A., we were in Chicago, we were in Madison Square Garden, and we were good workers, and we had like I said, we had every type of match. Hogan would sell out every first round with the guys he worked with, but they always wanted him very strong at the end. So no matter what, he'd always be making a comeback, so the fans could see that he couldn't be beat. So his second round would always drop, and he would never go much further than the second round because he was so strong. He was over so strong that people didn't believe that he could get beat. But I was such a good seller, and Greg would leave me laying there, and I'd be selling and getting sympathy, and we'd have a return match, and we'd tie up our interviews with what we'd left at at the ending of the match, and people just bought it.
Yeah.
I had that surgery on my knee, which was real, and they taped it, and I remember when I went into the surgery, the Vince said the camera's there. I told the guys with the camera, I said, as soon as I wake up, put the mic in front of me and ask me the question, because I wanted to sound like I was, really, really hurting and groggy, and that's what they did, and listening to my interview, you could tell that I was, I was just waking up,
Yeah.
People bought it.
Yeah. So when you find out you're going to be the first match of WrestleMania, you thought you should have been higher up on the card with Greg Valentine.
Right. I thought
Right.
we should be one of the main events.
Yeah.
And here I am opening the match, and I was pretty upset, but I said, well, that's my job. I'm going to go out and do it.
Right.
So right before I went through the curtains, Vince Vince McMahon came up to me and he said, Tito, the reason you're the opening match is because we need to get the people off their ass.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to set the tempo for the rest of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me a completely different outlook.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. And so now looking back, I mean, do you have a different outlook now on that claim to fame there about WrestleMania?
Yeah, looking back, I mean, that's being the opening match on WrestleMania 1 is pretty big now.
Yeah, yeah.
I will always be remembered. They might not remember who the second match was, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, but they know who was the opener.
Yeah, that's true. How many WrestleManias did you wrestle on?
I was in the first 9 WrestleManias.
Man.
WrestleMania 9, it was a dark match against Papa Chango.
Mm.
And the only match that I won in WrestleManias was WrestleMania 1 and that dark match against Papa Chango, WrestleMania 9. All the other ones I either got beat or somebody, if I was in a tag or a 6-man tag, my partners got beat, but I don't remember winning any other matches in WrestleMania.
So you had a WrestleMania match. Well, I can't remember. I don't think it was a WrestleMania where Demolition took the belts from you when you were with Strike Force. Well, let's go back there. So Strike Force is something for me that's really memorable. So tell me, how did that come about?
We got over like $1 million, Strike Force.
Yeah.
And we show up, I don't know which, I believe it was a pay-per-view. It wasn't WrestleMania. It was a pay-per-view. And Rick Martel shows up and he said, he told Vince that he had to take some time off, that his wife was sick. And so Vince brought us all into the locker room with Demolition, and he says, Rick's going to have to take some time off, and we're going to drop the belts to Demolition tonight. And That's what happened.
Man, it's such a bummer because you were having such a good run.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I remember Rick Martel coming in with Tom Zink and doing the Can-Am connection, and then Tom Zink disappeared, and then you guys you came together one night. I think you were doing announcing or something, and then ended up coming in and making a save on a match, and then you guys just had this killer run, and every match you guys had was just so exciting to watch. And I remember you guys beating the Hart Foundation for those belts, and it was just so crazy because the Hart Foundation was such a big staple in tag team wrestling back then.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
So
was a good run.
yeah. Now were you tag team wrestling? Were you and Rick? You had great chemistry, but were you guys friends?
Yeah, we had been friends. We had teamed up in Minnesota for the AWA for Vern Gagne.
Mm-hmm.
They teamed us up, and we as a matter of fact, we had babyface matches against Jumpin' Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne.
Oh, wow.
And again, we were main eventers, and the people bought, our team. I mean, we had, again, a pretty good run, all kinds of, I mean, we went hour Broadways. We went an hour with a babyface tag team match.
Yeah.
And we would keep the people, on their toes, the whole match.
Yeah. So now you had this great run, which ends up at some point you end up start doing let's just finish up the Strike Force situation. Then I mean you have the match against the Brainbusters. I believe that was at a WrestleMania, and that kind of led to your guys falling out, and then you guys feuding. How long did that feud go with Rick Martel?
Well, it didn't go as long as it should have. It it when they split us up, and Rick Martel was coming back, I asked Vince if I could be the heel.
Mm.
But unknown to me, they had already planned this whole model gimmick.
Mm.
And Vince says, no, you're not going to be the heel. I got a lot of things that I can do with you as a babyface yet.
Mm.
Well, he didn't do much more after that. That was
Right.
towards the end of my, they were going to give me a big push at the end. They were going to go into Mexico, South America, Central America. And I mean, I ended up beating The Undertaker in Barcelona, Spain. And from what I understand, they were grooming me to be the world champion. But then
Mm.
they changed their mind about going into Mexico and South America and Central America and Spain. And I
Mm.
wrestled The Undertaker in the main event in 1992, and the place was completely sold out.
Mm.
The next show, they went back a few months later. Brett wrestled, God, see, I forgot who he wrestled, and the house, dropped in half.
Wow.
They wanted a Spanish guy there.
Yeah. Wow. So you had a brief run, kind of at the time they gave you a gimmick as the El Matador. How did you feel about that when they gave that to you?
Well, Vince says you're going to have one more run, and I believed him. I thought he was going to give me a push, and I think at that point is when they were going to make me a champion, and then he changed his mind.
Mm.
And I actually went to Mexico, went to Tijuana to train to be a bullfighter, and I got the gimmick. And I don't know how you feel, but I was supposed to come out from that when I came back with a big angle with the $1 Million Man,
Mm.
and they changed that at the end, and he ended
Mm.
up having that with the God. What was the guy that used to bite the turnbuckles?
Oh, George Steele?
George Steele
Yeah.
instead of me. So
Mm.
the beginning of the end for me, started happening shortly after I got the Matador. So how did I like it? I would have liked it if they would have pushed it, but they didn't push it. So I didn't
Mm.
care too much for El Matador.
Mm. Now, after that, where I want to spend a little bit of time talking about post wrestling. You became a middle school teacher. Was that something that was always in the cards? Was that kind of your fallback, or?
No, I had my degree already.
Right.
when I went to college, it was my wife who kept saying, why don't you teach? Why don't you teach? Well, I didn't think that teachers weren't making that much money. My first contract was for $38,000 a year,
Right.
but uh, the independent market was, I mean, wide open, and I was making more wrestling on Friday, Saturday, and Sundays than I was working for Vince uh, 7 days a week.
Right.
So, I
Right.
mean, little did I know about the independent market.
Yeah.
We were able to sell our gimmicks.
Yeah.
I mean, we were doing good.
Yeah. What years were those? Were you doing the independent stuff?
I probably I retired in '93, and I probably started doing the independents in '94. I took some time off,
Mm. Yeah.
and you worked when you wanted to work, and I started doing. I was a sub. I became a sub first, and then an opening show, came about, and I got the job.
How, so how do the kids react when they find out you were a wrestler?
The kids, they I teach in the town that I live in, so I'm the only celebrity in the town, so everybody knew who I was.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Hmm.
kids love being in my class,
Yeah.
and you're not just like wrestling. You're not a good wrestler the first day you step into the ring. Same thing with teaching. Teaching you learn as you go along. And
Yeah.
it's not an easy profession, especially now. It's getting harder and harder. I'm retiring June 15th, and I can't wait.
Oh man, you're almost there. You're almost
Yeah,
at the end. How long have you been teaching?
this will be 26 years.
Wow. What have you seen as the biggest difference now versus when you first started teaching?
Well, technology,
Mm.
it's technology plays a big role. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we They considered me an old-fashioned teacher. I used to like to be in the front and teach the whole class and explain everything that I was teaching. And now they want all they want is for you to teach, give them an assignment for the first 10 minutes and let them figure it out themselves and then go over it at the end. It's a completely different concept, and we don't even have books in school anymore. It's all technology.
What subjects do you teach?
I teach Spanish.
Oh, okay, nice. And so, how about the kids? I gotta imagine the kids now are just probably so different. If you were 26 years ago, I mean, you're not too far off from when I was in high school. I look at my kids and they're just so different than my generation. I gotta imagine teaching them is different too.
Well, I think the kids are just a lot smarter.
Mm.
Uh, and, a lot of people talk about how horrible kids are. Good kids are good kids, and bad kids are bad kids. But if you look at, real close, bad kids are usually kids who have a horrible home life. They might not have a parent. Uh,
Hmm.
they might be raised by grandparents. Kids who misbehave, usually have problems at home, and it's sad. If you can touch and you can reach, and I believe that I have made a difference for a lot of these kids.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's rewarding for you.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Do you feel? Let me ask you, and it may be a completely different thing, and it may even be an unfair question, but if you had to choose teaching or wrestling? Which one do you think you would choose to do again?
Uh, I believe I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'd. The sacrifice of all, we used to be on the road 350 days a year. I didn't get to see my kids grow up. I was gone so much. It's
Hmm.
that's one of my main regrets.
Hmm. How many, and your kids, how old are they now?
I think my oldest one is 41, and then 39, and then 37. Three,
Yeah.
three, yeah.
Yeah. And do you feel like your relationship with them now has been tainted by the fact that you weren't around back then? Or do you think that the relationship is good now?
I think the relationship is good. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they were still in school, and I was a volunteer coach for football for 12 years.
Hmm.
I was there to coach every one of them, and I watched. I was around later on to watch them
Hmm.
grow up.
Yeah. That's awesome. Do you, so you mentioned when we were setting up this interview, we actually had it set, I think, for tomorrow, and you were like, "Oh, I got to reschedule it. It's my anniversary." How long have you been? How long have you been married?
Uh, it'll be 42 years.
Man, so tell me, what that's so rare in the wrestling business, where someone is able to maintain that relationship. And you talked about the sacrifice. What was it that you think was what is it that you think kind of helped you guys make it through those tough times?
Well, I think I had a good woman, number
Yeah.
one,
Hmm.
and coming where I came from, uh, family was very important,
Hmm.
and I was just happy that I was making a good living, and I was able to give my kids my family a good life, even though I was on the road all the time. They've lived they lived a good life, and uh, we still continue to have a good life, thank God.
Do your kids live close to you, or do they all over the country?
No, they're all over. I
Okay.
have a kid. I have my middle son graduated from Princeton. He lives in Africa. He does human rights work.
Wow.
My middle one lives in Tewksbury. He's about 30 miles away,
Mm.
and then the other one lives upstate New York.
Wow. Man, you got to be proud.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, very, very, very proud. They
So,
all have masters, and they've all done well.
so if you were talking to somebody who was brand new in the business and just hungry to get there, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Well, whenever I would do seminars, I'd always tell them education is the most important thing.
Hmm.
Get your education, have something to fall back on.
Hmm.
I'm sure you know yourself. You see so many wrestlers that don't have didn't have anything to fall back on, and they're still struggling.
Yeah.
They're in their 70s and have to be on the road because they have to be.
Yeah.
You know, and
Do you do
that's
you
tough.
occasion do you occasionally? I'm sure you do wrestle cons and things of that nature, but do you ever get in the ring anymore?
No, I no more ring for me.
No more for you. Nice. Listen,
Yeah.
I know we talked about you wanted to do an hour, but I just have a couple of questions I ask everybody. I want to shoot at you, and then we can wrap up. Okay.
Okay.
So the first question is I want to ask you, what do you think is your biggest success in life?
Uh, Being married for 42 years with the same woman.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Um, we kind of talked about that, but what would you say was your biggest failure in life, and what did you learn from it?
My biggest failure, well, probably that I wasn't around to now that I'm a grandfather and I see my grandkids,
Mhm.
I see him taking steps, see him making the first sounds and speaking, and I wasn't around for any of that. I mean, I missed birthdays, I missed every Christmas we were wrestling, New Year's Eve we were wrestling, Thanksgiving we were wrestling, we were entertaining the fans. I missed being around. My biggest failure is that I was not around to raise my kids, and I see how much work it is to raise a kid, and I wasn't around to help my wife with that.
Yeah. Um, if you could go back, would you have changed to anything?
I I probably wouldn't have wrestled if I
Yeah.
if I if I if I had to do it all over again. I would have. I'm a hard worker.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Started working in the fields when I was 7 years old, so I would have figured out a way to make a good living for my family. I don't know that would have married my wife because I would have been in Texas, but I would have figured a way to be successful.
Yeah. Wow. Final question. One day we hope it's a long way away, but one day you're going to pass away, and there's going to be a funeral, and someone will give a eulogy. What's the one thing you hope someone says about you in your eulogy?
Uh, that I was a good, honest, caring man.
Yeah. So important. You know. Yeah, I love what you said about your kids. You don't hear that a lot from a lot of wrestlers. I mean, you hear about the sacrifices, but saying you wouldn't do it again, and that's so important. I'll share this with you. When I went on a mission for my church, I wrestled from 18 to 19, and then I left. And when I came back, I looked at what was different for me, and I looked at what I wanted to do. I'm 6'7". The idea, I know built pretty good. I'm 275 when I'm working out. And I said to myself, I was like, well, what do I want to do? And I knew that I wanted to be around for my kids, and I have 4 wonderful kids. And I'm grateful. I ended up becoming an attorney. And sometimes I look back and go, what would be different if I would it have been better? And I don't think it would have been, to be a wrestler. Could I have made it? I think I had a good shot. Just by my size alone, but I wouldn't trade the moments that I've had with my kids for anything, and you're getting to see that a little bit too. You saw that being able to coach their teams and do that stuff, and then also, to see your grandkids. I can't wait to have grandkids. Be able to send them off when they're tired,
Yeah.
when they tire you out. Yeah.
Don't be in a rush.
Yeah. No, it's funny. My kids are 16, 14, 12, and 10. It's my favorite time. It's been my favorite time as being a dad.
Enjoy
Because-
them.
Yeah, because they're so cool. My son is a senior, my daughter's a freshman, and watching them just develop into real human beings is just such a joy. It really is. So,
Yep.
Well, listen, I appreciate your time. I really do. Like I said at the beginning, this is a bucket list moment for me. This is exactly why I love having a podcast. We never would have really, I don't know if we ever would have interacted any other way. And I had an opportunity to sit here and talk to you for an hour and just pick your brain and hear your story. And it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope sometime we can do it again. So
Thank you. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed it, and very professional. I hope the fans enjoy it.
yeah, thank you. And subscribe if you've heard subscribe. We still got a lot more exciting stuff coming. And we'll see you next time. Thanks,
Okay.
Tito.
Thank you.